Good evening. Welcome to the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library. Particular welcome to those of you who may be here for the first time since we renovated. My name is David Quick. I'm the Adult Services Coordinator here at DC Public Library. I am very happy to welcome you all here tonight, to welcome Kal Penn here for the release of his paperback of You Can't Be Serious. Yes. I won't linger too much because I want to get right to the conversation, but as you know, Kal is a well-known actor who has starred in films like Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle and The Namesake, but also TV shows like House and How I Met Your Mother and Sunnyside, which if you haven't read the book in that chapter, it's wonderful. I can't wait to hear about it. He also, of course, worked in the Obama administration as the Associate Director of the White House Office of Public Engagement. A little bit about our moderator. Roswell Encina is the Chief Communications Officer at the Library of Congress, serving the Librarian of Congress, Dr. Carla Hayden. Yay, Dr. Hayden. Prior to that, he managed and coordinated communication at the Enoch Pratt Library in Baltimore and worked as a broadcast journalist for 16 years. He's a great friend to DCPL and libraries everywhere. A word of thanks to our friends from East City Bookshop who are selling books tonight, and support from DC Public Library Foundation. Roswell, thanks for leading the conversation tonight. Kal, welcome back to DC, and thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Thank you, David, and thank you all for supporting the DC Public Library and all your libraries in your neighborhoods. We really appreciate that. And Kal, welcome back to DC.
Thank you. It's nice, very nice to be back, and this building is insane.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
I was here.
What do you miss?
I miss Great Wall Szechuan on 14th Street.
It's still there.
I know it's still there. I had it last night. But yeah, and obviously I have a lot of good friends here, and it's a great place to live, and I miss it.
Before we reminisce, I know you want to read a portion from your book.
Yes, I'm told, since we're selling copies outside from a wonderful local independent bookstore, so if you are interested and have not yet, grab them out there, and I think we're going to do a signing afterwards. Is that right? So they asked me to read a small section from the book, and I was trying to find something that wouldn't bore you, but also didn't have like too many dick jokes. So I'm going to read, and this is DC, so I'll read a chapter from my DC days. This is the end of a chapter called Have a Heart, which is mostly about the White House response to the Haiti earthquake in 2011. And I worked in the White House Office of Public Engagement, mostly working on outreach to young people, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, and the arts community. And what we used to call my old life at the time, right? I took the sabbatical from acting to work at the White House, and almost nothing that I did at the White House had anything to do with my acting career, with the one exception of a little bit of overlap related to this. After the Haiti earthquake, we were trying to figure out how to best help, and people were calling the White House saying, what can we do? The biggest thing that folks could do was to donate money. So Obama partnered with Bush and Clinton to set up something called the Bush-Clinton Haiti Fund to raise money for people in Haiti. So the lead up to all of that was all the work that we did around the clock for about a week and a half before Obama hosted Bush and Clinton over the course of a weekend to make that public announcement. So that's the lead up to this. Bizarre incidents make for great stories, but they are thankfully outliers. Most people, Hollywood or not, were generous in their eagerness to help, and in ways that were more meaningful than donating shoes to people who didn't have food. Some examples: George Clooney's Haiti telethon raised $61 million. Olivia Wilde had been working outside Port-au-Prince since long before the quake, and she stepped up big time by raising money and awareness. The outpouring of generosity from the entertainment community was heartening. Lots of celebrities used the talking points that we provided to guide the public to the right places to donate and help. And all those good people all over the country opened their hearts and their bank accounts. Everyone was doing their part. Our round-the-clock week finally came to a close late Friday night. On Saturday morning, as planned, Presidents Bush and Clinton would be joining President Obama to formally launch the Bush-Clinton Haiti Fund from the Rose Garden. I wrote a final memo at Tina and Valerie, that's Tina Chen and Valerie Jarrett's request, detailing our entertainment messaging and outreach, and then walked over to Tina's office in the West Wing to make absolutely sure that they had everything they needed for the next morning's senior level meeting with the former presidents. "We're ready. Just go home and get some sleep," Tina said. "We don't need you to come in tomorrow." This was one of the many reasons we loved our boss. Her expectations were high and she could be tough, but she also cared deeply about her staff. "Thank you," she said as I turned to leave. "POTUS really appreciates this. The extra push is huge. Go get some rest." That was all I needed to hear. I was exhausted. Since the news of the earthquake, we'd all worked nonstop for almost a week. So I badged out, I went straight home, changed out of my suit, and went out to get hammered with other overworked staffers who also wanted to blow off some steam. After too many picklebacks and jello shots at the old Adams Morgan Dive Million Al's, I know, I miss it, I made a pit stop at 7-Eleven to invest in the universal peer-reviewed hangover cure: Gatorade, ibuprofen, and a frozen pizza of questionable vintage. I finally crashed into bed around 3:30. 3 hours later, I woke up to use the bathroom, and I noticed that the red light on my work BlackBerry was blinking. I checked my email while stumbling to the toilet. From Valerie Jarrett, Saturday, the 16th of January, 2010, 6:21 a.m. Subject: this morning. Can you PLS meet us in the cabinet room at 7:30 a.m. to brief 42, 43, and POTUS on Haiti outreach at the Golden Globes? And for folks that don't know, 42 is President Clinton, 43 is President Bush, and 44 obviously is Obama. Oh, fuck. I threw down my BlackBerry and jumped in the shower. I wasn't drunk anymore, but I wasn't hungover yet. I was in between. The in between is the worst. In the in between, you feel both completely invincible and totally screwed. You hope you've avoided the debilitating crapulence of your actions, but you know there's still residual alcohol left inside you. You're either totally fine, heroic even, or you're about to vomit. Now imagine feeling that way and knowing that you need to brief 3 presidents. Terrified, I darted out of the shower, threw on my suit, and bolted out the door. The weather was surprisingly mild for a January weekend. I ran a block, no cabs. Jesus. 1 more block, no cabs. Seriously? Damn it, DC. The S1 bus wasn't running, and this was a pre-Uber world, so I couldn't just whip out my phone and get a car. I had to get down to the White House. So I did the only thing that made sense. I ran. In full suit and dress shoes, I sprinted all the way to the northwest gate of the complex. This is not something I recommend if you think you might hurl. As I bounded up the driveway at 7:45, the impassive Marine sentry stationed outside the door opened it for me. In the lobby, I found Rhodes, the president's nickname for the West Wing receptionist, or receptionist of the United States, at her desk. The first Rhodes of the administration was Darian Page, a friend who, at the moment, looked at me like I was totally insane. I stood there, out of breath, glistening with alcohol-infused sweat. "I'm here to see Valerie in the cabinet room." Consistently calm, Rhodes stared at me wide-eyed. "Are you sure?" I pulled out my BlackBerry to show her the email. She was still skeptical, which makes sense, and I think it was with a decent amount of hesitation about my future that she pointed down the hall and said, "They should still be in there." A flock of security personnel parted to let me through. I made a left turn and walked down the hall to a room where 1 current and 2 former presidents were sitting. I hastily wiped my face with a napkin stuffed in my pocket, knocked, put on a professional smile, and went in. 2 friends inside, Ben Rhodes and Tommy Viator, immediately recognized my in-between state and smirked. "Invincible!" "You just missed the presidents," Valerie said. "Have a seat. You can brief Doug and Andy." Doug Band and Andy Card, respectively Clinton and Bush's chiefs of staff, seemed to know that I had been called in last minute, so there were no hard feelings for my tardiness. Whew. I took everyone through the White House outreach plan to, quote, magnify the ways in which our outside partners would help with earned media during the Golden Globes the following day. Yes, it was a relatively easy thing to brief somebody on, but let me tell you, under the circumstances, I crushed that briefing. As I learned on my second day at the White House, I knew not to expect a pat on the back for doing my job well. Still, if I'm being honest, considering the 7-Eleven food that I was struggling to keep down, I was thankful that I seamlessly executed. Nobody except my friends could tell I was in between. I was proud of how far I'd come. I had gone from not having ever worked in politics before to briefing 2 presidential chiefs of staff on something of substance without breaking a sweat. Proverbially, I was still sweating from running into the weddings. We finished up our meeting and waited for our bosses next to the entrance to the Oval Office. Someone had placed a tray of cookies on the table, but I didn't think it was smart to test the fortitude of my stomach by having one. As we stood side by side, all of us serving people who were either currently running the world or had run it before, we talked about normal things, how people's kids were doing, the fact that it was cardio day for me, done and done. That I might pick up my favorite Chinese food at Great Wall on 14th Street for dinner. It was a reminder of the paradox of the West Wing, that you can stand in the same place where so much history has been made and still debate the ideal spot to get mala cold noodles. The casual banter broke as the president started walking out of the Oval on the way to deliver their sobering announcements. President Obama walked out first, and he didn't even look at those cookies. Talk about self-discipline. President Clinton exited next. He stopped to take a peek at the cookies, but he didn't pick one up. My doctor says these are bad for my heart, he mentioned to President Bush, who exited last. Bush saw the cookies and he took one. Then he took another one. He smiled ear to ear, looked off in the distance, and said, "Some people say I don't even have a heart." Standing in the Rose Garden watching the announcement, I felt my BlackBerry vibrate. An email chain with Rhodes and Viator, who were standing at arm's length away from me. "Hey man, didn't you do a movie with George Bush?" Tommy wrote. I had, sort of. Actor James Adomian played President Bush in Harold and Kumar Escape from Guantanamo Bay. In a now iconic scene, Harold and Kumar hang out and smoke weed with him in his Crawford, Texas ranch. So standing there in my in-between state, feeling proud of my very small contribution to this moment and getting ribbed by my friends a few feet away, I thought about how to respond. This announcement by three presidents was a somber one. I also had a quick flashback to a situation in which I used the word MILF on a National Security Council email, and I knew that I should be cautious in whatever I wrote back. Stifling a laugh and craving Advil and water, I simply typed, "I can't believe you guys put that on a Presidential Records Act email." That's it. Thank you. The book, for folks who haven't read, as we were talking before, is sort of, I hope, feels like we're hanging out and having a beer and sharing some sometimes serious, sometimes ridiculous stories.
You know, in previous interviews, you've said that you want people to read this book and think that you're having a beer with you. And I should say, though, after reading it and listening to it, it does feel like I'm sitting at the bar with you and you're cracking some jokes and talking about some serious stuff at the same time.
Thank you.
I have to ask you, though.
Yeah.
I still can't believe that you ran all the way up to the White House. How far was this?
So I was living closer to U Street, between Logan and U, so like a mile?
Jesus.
A little over a mile and a half, right? Yeah, no, it was not good news. I must have smelled horrible, by the way. Also, this is a fun little
You were
tidbit.
sweating Jell-O shots.
I was sweating Jell-O shots. Valerie Jarrett was kind enough to help me kick off the book launch when the hardcover came out. We did our first event together, and on stage, she didn't tell me this, but she goes, "Hey, the chapter about Haiti," and I was like, "Oh my God, I never sent this to you in advance." She goes, "I was wondering what happened to you." And I said, "Did you know that I was hungover, that I had gone out drinking?" She's like, "Absolutely not. I had absolutely no clue. I was just wondering because you were a little bit late and you're usually so on time." But then I read the book and I was like, "Oh, yeah, okay."
Now, we've all been a little preoccupied
Sure,
I guess, for the past couple of years. So what made you decide that this was the time to write your memoir?
So I'd actually, there were a couple of times where other folks had suggested. I've only had one manager for my acting career. We've worked together for about 20 years. And the day I left the White House, he called me and he goes, "Hey man, you got to write a book." And I said, "No, why would I write a book?" And he goes, "Because you realize literally nobody has ever worked in Hollywood and then worked in politics." And I was like, "The governor of California is Arnold Schwarzenegger. Reagan was president. Ben Stein wrote speeches for 2 presidents. I was like, "Come on." And he said, "No, you know what I mean." I said, "Look, I love you to death. I think you view this as an opportunity to sort of stay relevant. That's not why I took a sabbatical to work in public service, and there's no reason to write a book." But then as kind of time went by, and then especially around the pandemic, there was this idea that I always felt like I had this blessing of having worked in entertainment and in government, where for the son of immigrants, there's no guidebook to that, right? And you generally don't know people working in these industries.
Now, right?
Well, so I was hoping, I was like, I sort of want to write something for like the 22-year-old version of me. And then the second piece of it is, when I was a kid, you were told, pick one thing and stick to it, and that's it. But ever since then, it's like, no, you should have multiple passions in life. You should have multiple things that you want to do. So I thought maybe there was an opportunity to share my story, so I figured I'd give it a shot.
Let's talk about you being a kid.
Yeah.
I was telling you backstage that this book reads like, despite the parts in Hollywood and the parts at the White House, it reads like a love letter to your parents.
Thank you.
You grew up in New Jersey. You're a son of, yay, you're right?
That bravado is, yeah, okay, then you're nodding, yeah. Yeah.
I thought we were supposed to fist.
We are, so that's why I was like, it's a library, so I guess that's why it was just a quick woo.
But as the son of immigrants,
Yeah.
What did your parents instill in you growing up?
Oh, man. Okay. I think there are certain things like, work hard, study. I think I'll take one step back and just for context, I think obviously any immigrant parent is like pushing their kids so that they can have a better life than
I
they
don't know
had.
anything about that.
Right, yeah, I assumed you didn't. I think in the case of my parents and a lot of their friends, so they were part of this post-1965 wave of immigration. So in the mid-60s, there was a shortage in the United States of doctors, engineers, pharmacists, things like that, which is one of the reasons there's so many brown and yellow doctors, engineers, pharmacists. Absolutely nothing in our DNA that allows for that. But there was a shortage, so people like my dad, who was pursuing a degree in engineering, was allowed to come here for that reason. So I think then when my brother and I were born and raised in New Jersey, they passed on the value system that they knew, but somehow it was sort of mixed in with ethnicity in a very strange way. So for them, we're South Asian, we're immigrants, you have to study. But really it was the fact that an education timed with the right immigration changes were what allowed them to pursue the American dream. So as a child, obviously, it's super confusing. And I'm like, also, I'm terrible at math and science. I just want to make weird characters and like make people laugh. So it was a little bit of like back and forth on things like that.
And I know your grandparents had a lot to do
Yeah.
with your upbringing. Tell the audience more about them. Your grandparents marched with Gandhi.
They did,
I should
yeah.
say, though, this month, India is celebrating the 75th anniversary of its independence.
Wow, yeah.
What do you think your grandparents will think with the U.S., with a female vice president who's
Yeah.
also Indian American?
Yeah, I think they probably, in typical Indian immigrant fashion, it would probably just be an understated good. Like it means way more than that. It means like a manuscript. But no, of course, I think they would. I think they would be very, very excited to see that. My mom said something really sweet when. So let me just back. So my grandparents did march with Gandhi, and those were stories that they told us when we were little kids. So like 8-year-old me, being coerced to eating vegetables, and grandma telling stories about Gandhi, and I literally like the 8-year-old me is like, there she goes again, another story about this Gandhi. And it wasn't until probably 6th or 7th grade that you realize, wow, that this idea of nonviolent civil disobedience and how that ties into our own civil rights movement, something you're incredibly proud of, but it also was, doing the right thing or standing up for certain beliefs was just a family value. It was certainly not called politics or leadership or anything like that. So then when I had the chance to bring my parents to the Obama inaugural concert. My mom said the sweetest thing in passing at the end of the concert. She just said, your grandparents would be very proud today. And I was just like, trying to make me cry right here? Come on. So it was a very kind thing for them to say, and I obviously don't know that, I don't know any of us could have fathomed the types of changes that have happened in the country in the last 10 years, and I certainly don't think my grandparents would have.
It's a lot's happened in the past 10 years. I should say, though, you mentioned something about how your grandparents and how civic-minded you've become because of them. I think in the beginning of your book, you laid out your superpower here. Let me just read it out. It's on page 8, if you look it up. It's right above your
Page
picture.
8?
Yes.
All right, what did I
it
start
says,
with?
At the age of 11, my curiosity led me to learn the power of words, the beauty of imagination, and the consequences of silence. Us being in a library here, that is like music to our ears.
Yeah.
So I feel like that paved the way for your, I would say, life, but your career. I mean, it showed your imaginative side, and it kind of showcased that you were not going to take crap from anyone.
That
Right.
story, I had not thought about it in that context. That story, if you have read the book, I open the story with being called the N-word in kindergarten, and being so young that I didn't even know what that word referred to, but I knew that it was supposed to be bad, and it was supposed to be something that somebody thought I was, even though I was also aware that I was not, whatever that word is. And so it was, and then I got that kid in trouble for something else. I stayed quiet about that, but I threw him under the bus for something that I did wrong. In 5th grade, by the way. So it's kind of you to say that. The other side of it is like, yo, you held a grudge from kindergarten through 5th grade and then threw that kid under the bus? That's diabolical.
Whatever happened to that kid, by the way? Do you know?
I don't know. I wish him the best. I hope I hope that's not who he became. Yeah.
Middle school and high school is not easy for most people,
Yeah.
I should say. What was the tipping point for you when you realized the arts and acting was the thing you wanted to do?
For me, that was around 8th grade. There were a couple things that happened the 8th grade year. So I mean, who doesn't love watching, you watch things growing up. I'm trying to find the right context to, well, no, look, I'll just say in 8th grade, the first time I saw anybody who looked like me on screen, who wasn't either in brown face or brown voice or a cartoon character, was when Mira Nair's film Mississippi Masala came out. And it was one of her early films, one of Denzel Washington's early films. He and Sarita Choudhury have this love story about a couple in rural Mississippi. Awesome movie. I went to go see it with my parents and my cousin. And it was the first time I'd seen, characters who were similar to my own family, but also characters who were deeply flawed, which makes them human, right? I mean, some of these people were racist. They had marital problems. Denzel and Sarita make love. And I was like, oh shit, I can have sex one day? I didn't realize that. So there are all those sorts of things that you see for the first time. And the only way I can explain it, if you did have the privilege of growing up seeing people who looked like you on screen regularly, is when you don't see that, you almost feel like your opportunities might be limited. That, okay, maybe this thing isn't for me. Maybe I'm not allowed to do something like that. And sometimes it's overt, sometimes it's subconscious. For me, it was subconscious until I saw that movie and I was blown away. And I'm like, why am I feeling this way? I'm feeling this way because I feel like maybe I can do what they're doing too. That was timed to, in 8th grade, I played the Tin Man in our school's production of The Wiz. You're welcome. And unless you're insane and middle school was a good experience for you, middle school was not awesome. And so if you were a drama kid, middle school was even worse. And for us, when we were rehearsing the play, we had to share part of the rehearsal space with the soccer players, who were the cool kids. And then we would share a late school bus home, which was the chance for them to torment us. And this was before this is now called bullying. But at the time it was called 8th grade. So we, it was it was things like you'd get beat up and spit on and things like that on the late bus home. And I had realized that there was this component of it if you were a brown kid where they would also, while they were doing this, they'd be kicking your ass and quoting Apu from The Simpsons. I was like, okay, so the imagery that you're getting matters to you in a way that I hadn't considered until there's spit in my hair and there's punches being thrown. I'm like, all right. So in that same time frame, the school principal is like, hey, great news, everybody. Before we put the play up in the evening for the parents, you guys are going to do 3 scenes from the play for the whole school. And we were like, fuck no. We are not doing that at all, under any circumstances. They're like, well, if you're not going to do it, then we're going to pull the whole play down. So we were forced to do this. They gather the whole school, including the soccer players, and there were 3 scenes we had to do. I was only in one of them. It was a scene where the Tin Man gets, by the way, I'm sorry, I just noticed there are kids in the audience, and I apologize for the language. The Tin Man gets his heart, and in the line as scripted when he gets his heart from the Wiz is he's supposed to walk to the center of the stage and very sweetly say, all you fine ladies out there, watch out. And it's meant to indicate the Tin Man is capable of love. And I was terrified of this line because I knew that for the soccer players, they were just going to make fun of me. So there's this concept that you might have heard where actors are in the zone. So they're just fully in the character. They don't really understand what's happening. This is the first time I remember being fully in the zone. So the Wiz gives me the heart. And I walk to the edge of the stage, and yeah, there's a picture.
There's
right?
a picture.
Yeah. I walked to the edge of the stage, and I said, instead of saying it sweetly, I went, "All you fine ladies out there," and I did this pelvic thrust. And then I said, "Watch out." And I turned around, and the crowd went wild. They were on their feet. Girls were screaming. Everybody was applauding. And in my head, I was like, what did you do? You're going to get in so much trouble. Why would you do? On that late bus home, we got on the bus, and everyone started applauding. And all these idiot soccer players were like, "Yo, that was so funny. Why didn't you tell us that's what you're doing? That was awesome." Now, aside from the problematic nature of like bullies being responsible for telling the bullier why they shouldn't be bullied, so like F that. Aside from all that, it was the first time that I realized, wow, so all of your imagery up until that point for somebody who looks like me was Apu from The Simpsons, voiced by a white dude. And that's why you introduced race. I would have been bullied anyway, let's be honest. But like the introduction of race or ethnicity into that bullying is a whole separate component to it. And so then I was like, this feeling of uniting people through humor and dismantling whatever the preconceived notions you had before you walked in there. It was that feeling that I found so magical, combined with seeing Mira Nair's film around the same time, that made me say, maybe this is something that I want to do for the rest of my life.
We should tell everyone, though, that it's on YouTube, that video. Oh, well, they showed it on the Today Show,
Oh,
so I'm
yeah,
assuming
no.
it's somewhere,
yeah,
right?
By the way, yeah, I
video
did.
of it, so.
It's also when, for those of you who are writers, you know this, like, when you write, you're back in the moment. And so as I was writing it, I was like, oh yeah, it was such a massive pelvic thrust and blah, blah, blah. And then I watched the video, and it was like, oh, yeah, no. It was definitely an 8th grade appropriate version of what that was. Well, you do hear the crowd going wild.
They did. I should say, though, bullying in middle school and high school is a whole lot different when you grow up.
Yeah.
Some of the stories that you tell when you made it to Hollywood, between the actors in brownface, some producers or casting directors asking you to do the accent or put a turban on.
Yeah.
For the average person, most of us would probably quit.
Sure.
Where did you find the drive to continue?
I think so. I would say 2 answers. One, anyone in careers that are like I would say anything in the arts, acting, music, anything in sports. There's a sort of actually politics. There's like you have to have some sort of insanity to think that you can do this, right? And so you do it because you have to do it. It's not necessarily a rational question of whether you want to do it. You look at polling numbers in politics, like, oh yeah, this person shouldn't do that, and they do it anyway. And then sometimes they win. So it was that, I think, that was certainly part of it. But there's a good chunk of the book where I talk very candidly about the number of times that I decided I was going to quit. So going on years worth of auditions where the only thing was, I would walk in, and this is not like woe is me. This was just systemically. This was a story that's shared by a lot of performers at the time where you mentioned an accent, right? An accent alone doesn't make a stereotype. Plenty of people have accents. The challenge is when accents are used to mask bad writing or when they're used as a reductionist mechanism for a character that otherwise doesn't have an arc. That's where it becomes a stereotype. And you hear the byproduct of this where even folks in the South Asian community or any community that has a stereotype out there, they'll say, oh gosh, he had to play a cab driver. Well, what's wrong with being a cab driver, man? Like a hardworking profession, like what you're actually saying is you're not trying to disparage cab drivers. You're recognizing that the association of a profession and ethnicity with a character that doesn't have any agency in a system for a prolonged period of time is really what you're talking about. So yeah, you'd get asked to play parts like that, and so there was a good stretch of time where I was either only getting auditions for that, and sometimes I'd say no, and sometimes I'd go on those jobs, and sometimes I'd take those jobs because I wanted to build up my resume. And then other times you'd get the rare audition for like Brad from Omaha. And I was so psychologically beat up by the other auditions that I was like, I'm obviously not getting the part of Brad from Omaha. So I wasn't even trying. And so then it became self-fulfilling because I was damaging, I was sabotaging myself from anything that could happen. And so there were times like that where, I was in the shower one day going, what are you doing? You're not happy auditioning for the stereotypical nonsense. You've decided yourself before you even gave it a shot that you're not getting the part of Brad from Omaha. So why don't you just go to law school? And then I think it was like, okay, well, I was really bad at the practice LSAT, but B, it was like, no, that's not actually what you want to do. So that's the crazy component from before is like, no, you have to continue to find a way in.
I think you called it Brown Catch-22. Do you want to
Yeah.
explain that to the audience?
Sure, yeah. There's something I call the Brown Catch-22 in the book, which is where, and thankfully, by the way, I just want to be clear. One of the reasons I write about all these things is it's so exciting how much entertainment has progressed, especially in the last 10 to 12 years, and that's mostly because of streaming platforms. And of course, a lot of the book is about race and ethnicity in Hollywood, but even more broadly, it was very rare to see the types of projects that you're seeing out there right now, especially Amazon, Hulu, Netflix. Like think about the last time you saw characters from the American South that weren't just complete reductionist stereotypes, and that's changing a lot with the types of things that are out there. So I don't just mean it in terms of like,
Exactly.
it's a wonderful thing for audiences across the board. And what was the question? Because now I totally.
What is the Brown? What's
Oh, the Brown Catch-22,
Catch-22?
right? So back in the day, this was if you looked a specific way, and to be fair, every actor deals with, what you look like dictates the initial jobs that you get, but you were only allowed to audition for parts that were generally reductionist or stereotypes, and you weren't allowed. I mean, agents would say this: you weren't allowed to directly audition for something like a Brad from Omaha. So the only way that you could get those auditions is if you had credits on your resume, but you couldn't get credits on your resume unless you played parts like that. And so there was generally a calculus with a lot of performers of color at the time. How many of those do you audition for? If you get them, how many of them do you do? Do you have conversations privately with the producers or directors to try and change the narrative of the character? Or do you just take the $500 to pay your rent, get the credit on your resume, and hope that it builds up? And there's no like playbook for that, but that's essentially the Brown Catch-22, that in order to get your foot in the door, you have to take those jobs, but you can't get those jobs unless you have your foot in the door.
There are a lot of stories there that were pretty shocking. I also want to, you may blush a little bit about it, but I think you're a bit of a trailblazer when it comes to what you've done in Hollywood. Before maybe in the past couple of years, you're right, there's a lot of new programming out there, but before that, I think the only other non-stereotypical characters we saw were the two characters on ER. Then you came on House. Then suddenly we have two Marvel superheroes. We have shows on Netflix. We have Mindy Kaling, producing all these shows. How do you think we could keep the momentum going to make sure that Hollywood doesn't take 5 steps backwards?
Sure, yeah. First, I'm going to respectfully disagree. I'm very flattered, but I wouldn't have had the jobs that I had if there weren't tons of people that came before. And they're still working actors. They're 10 to 30 years older than me, and they may never be household names because there were never opportunities, but they went to drama school, they run theater companies, they work constantly. So I just want to be clear, I really do feel like if it weren't for the doors that they opened, I wouldn't have had the chance to do what I had the privilege of doing. The second piece of it is I think you're talking about communities that have come of age. So there's the aspect of internally, like any industry, right? What's entertainment doing to open the doors for people? There's just more diversity in their hiring and in content creation, which is ultimately a really good thing. The way Nielsen ratings and other people get demographics, so the streamers don't have to rely on Nielsen ratings or ad-driven revenue. They just look at whatever numbers they get in their algorithm. So that shows them what we all know, which is that most Americans, like most audiences, don't care about the race, ethnicity, et cetera, makeup of characters. They just want to laugh or cry or feel stories. We learned this with the Harold and Kumar movies. When that first came out, everyone's like, ugh, what a big risk, I don't know. And it tanked at the box office. And the general idea in Hollywood was, see, we told you 2 Asian American men can't open a movie. Then it came out on DVD with no marketing, and people in the middle of the country went nuts over it, and that wasn't on anybody's data sheet, but all of us were like, yeah, why are you viewing it as like some of the most racist people in Hollywood are like the most progressive? Why does it surprise you that all these Republicans are loving Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle? They love good movies. They love movies that everybody wants to laugh. So I think that's thankfully changing across the board, but it's also you're talking about a community that had a very particular type of immigration pattern, right? That was because of why our parents were allowed to come to America. So now that there's a generation of people who are entering those fields and who are unlike my parents' generation, are actually encouraging their kids to go into careers like the arts and leadership and politics, I think that changes a lot over time also.
Speaking of politics,
Yeah.
let's talk, Washington. We are here in DC.
Yeah.
You use the word crazy in the book a little bit, and I mean this in a good way. It's like,
yeah, all right.
what did people think when you did the crazy idea of, that you were in the two most polarizing industries and cities, Hollywood and Washington, and show business and politics. So how did your parents digest this?
Oh, you mean like when I said I'm taking a
Yes.
sabbatical from? Oh man, all right. So up until I was on House, my parents would still regularly call and beg me to go to grad school. So first, when I graduated from undergrad, it was like at least go to law school. And then that slowly went to at least get an MBA. And then a couple of years later, that dipped down to like at least get a real estate license. And then I was on House, and they're like, you have a job every day? I'm like, yes. Like, so every day you get to go to a job. I'm like, yes. 5 days a week. I'm like, yeah, unless I'm not in any of the scenes that day. And I'm sure it didn't hurt that I was playing a doctor. At least. So I remember calling my dad when I had, they obviously knew that I was working on the Obama campaign. That was about a little over a year. But when I got the job in the public engagement office, I remember calling my parents and telling them, thinking they would be very excited. And I said, I'm going to take a sabbatical. Obviously, acting is my first love, and it'll be either a year or 2 years in DC, and then I'll come back to it. And my dad just started laughing maniacally. And he's very understated. He doesn't do stuff like this. I'm like, are you okay, Dad? And he goes, yeah. I'm like, did you hear me? He goes, oh, I heard you. And then I said, what did I say? He said, you're going to go work for Obama at the White House. And I said, yeah. Does that surprise you? And he goes, well, I said, what are you feeling right now? And he goes, look, let me just get this. So you're probably making very little money there compared to what you're making now? I'm like, yes, I'm told that I'm tied for the lowest paid White House staffer. He goes, does that become public? I'm like, yes, Politico writes about it every year. It's like, okay, so you're making no money, you're gonna live in Washington. Look, what do you want me to tell you? I said, well, what do you mean? Why are you laughing? He goes, because, and this was very sweet, he goes, because we told you not to be an actor and you went and did it anyway, so how can I tell you not to do this next thing that you think is a good idea? But he was like laughing at how ludicrous it was that I had finally had a regular job as an actor. So it was that combination of like, now that I'm an adult, I get it, that I can't imagine what that's like. You did not move to America for me to do any of this. So, yeah.
How did Hollywood prepare you for Washington or the White House?
I don't think it did. I think those are two very separate things. I think if anything, working in government kind of, in my case, gave me a perspective on the things that are possible. This is probably going to sound very hokey, but I guess if anything, the only real comparison that was sort of eye-opening, I was in the 2008 primary season, or I guess this was a general election. I did like this 4 or 5 state bus tour with Governor Dean, who was running the DNC at the time, and he said something like, he's like, hey man, what constitutes a success in the box office? I was like, I don't know. Like, he goes, well, what about TV? And I was like, well, network TV? I mean, it's a share of the likely number of people who are watching TV and how many of them are watching a particular show. So like, if like 80% of people love a particular show, or you're getting your ratings back from a test screening, 80% of people like it, it's okay, but like 90%, that's great. He's like, 90%? I said, yeah, why? What is it in your world? He's like, 51%, man. All I need is 51%. 90%? So I thought about that often when I was working at the White House. I was like, I guess the boss only needs 51%.
Kind of flip it around.
Yeah.
When you went back to acting, what did Washington teach you when you went back to Hollywood?
That's a good question. I guess probably a lot of patience, having more patience for things than I would. It also, I think, I worked in an administration that was unique in a number of ways, obviously, but it was the most diverse place that I have still worked to date, maybe perhaps with the exception of any shows that I create where I can hire who I want. But I remember going to Iowa in the primary when Obama was 30 points down in the polls against Clinton and Edwards, and walking into the Des Moines office and meeting a guy named Rohan Patel, who looks more like me than he doesn't. I mean, I'm not saying we all look alike, but you know what I mean. This Indian dude who was running rural and agricultural outreach for Obama, and I was like, why is this a good idea? You're like, you know, junior senator from Illinois, you're black, you're running in a 94% white state. Why would you hire an Indian guy to run your agriculture and rural outreach? And the two answers I got were basically, number one, he's the most qualified person for the job, and the senator just thinks that we should hire the most qualified people, period. And number two, we're asking people to vote for a black dude whose middle name is Hussein to become president of the United States. So if they're not cool with Rohan, they're not voting for him anyway. I was like, oh, I guess that's a good point. But so it was definitely, it was also like that in the administration. We were encouraged to meet with people who disagreed with what the president was doing. So I met with tons of young Republicans regularly. You know, that wasn't a thing that we weren't discouraged from doing. So then I come back to entertainment. I remember that it was the first week that I was working again. My manager called and he was very excited. He was like, hey man, I got this great audition for you next week. It's playing it's a supporting character in a Denzel Washington movie. I was like, that's awesome. What a special thing to come back to. Let me know when the audition is. And a week or two go by and I never heard from him. So I called him. I'm like, what's the deal with this awesome audition in this big Denzel Washington movie? He goes, oh yeah, they changed their minds. They don't want you. And I was like, but I haven't auditioned yet. He goes, yeah, no, I guess they said they already have a performer of color in the cast, and so they don't want any more. And I said, well, just so I know, like, the new competition, like, who did they cast? He's like, well, it's a Denzel Washington movie. I was like, well, now hold on a second. You're telling me that I can't be a supporting character in a Denzel movie because Denzel is in the movie? He's like, that's what they told me. So then I got mad and I said, can I have the producer's phone number? He's like, why? I said, because the first real black president of the United States had absolutely no problem hiring me twice. So maybe like a fake black dude in a movie playing a fake character, real black dude playing a fake character in a movie, would have no problem hiring a brown guy. And he laughed and he goes, yeah, welcome back to Hollywood. So if anything, I think the uniqueness of that particular time and then going back to an industry that at that time especially, 2012 was still way farther back than it is in 2022, was a bit of an eye-opener.
You talked about your work with the AAPI community and all the issues back then. Clearly, after the past couple of years during the pandemic, violence towards the AAPI community has risen.
Yeah.
What do you think as a community we should do? I think so much progress was done, maybe 10 years ago. We took 5 steps back. As a community, what could be done aside from telling people to stay strong, stop Asian hate? I feel like what could we do as a whole?
One of the things that's been inspiring to me through that process is there's plenty of noise about what to do and what not to do. Over the last 2 summers, it's been very reassuring to see communities show up for each other. So the number of Asian Americans at the Black Lives Matter protests was very reassuring to see, and vice versa. The number of coalition communities that showed up for Stop Asian Hate things. But it's a lot of community-based things too, right? So depending on where you are and are you looking out for your neighbors, it's absolutely an awful time. But I think some of that community building that we necessarily hadn't always done and just should do more of has been some sort of a silver lining.
You light up when you talk about working in the community, working with people. Would you ever consider running for office?
No, I don't. And I know that's what you're supposed to say, but really no.
Are you sure?
I'm positive.
Everybody starts with writing a memoir first, then they run for office, right?
Yeah, thank you. I'll tell you this. I would. I'm going off to Iowa now for the next year. No, I think I really enjoy having privacy, being able to do things that I want to do. I think as an artist, there's a reasonable expectation that you have that privacy, but you give some of it up. When you run for office, there's no reasonable expectation of privacy. I think that's one of the things that people in leadership give up. There was that amazing interview that Pete Buttigieg did, I think on Fox News, where he totally dismantled the notion that that you have a right to privacy and walked that line between what's respectful and what's disrespectful when there's somebody in public office. I don't have that skill, nor do I want that skill. That said, I would love to continue to be helpful if a political appointment's in the cards again. I've made no secret of like one of my dream jobs. I used to think it was in retirement, but maybe it's in the not so far future if I'm fortunate. I'd love to be an ambassador. I'd love to. I did a grad program in cultural diplomacy, and so I'd love to continue to use my private sector background to work in the people-to-people diplomacy space. But none of those require running for office.
Is anybody from OPM around here?
I mean,
Could tell.
yeah, if there are open slots and you think I could get confirmed, great. But otherwise, I mean, years from now,
Hypothetically,
just not in retirement.
if President Biden or the Vice President gives you a call right now, would you come back?
That's a big hypothetical. What has been very flattering for not just myself, but a lot of folks who, and this doesn't just go for the current administration, but you'll get calls from people who are in different places. Like I've been in touch with the public engagement office at the White House, and they reach out from time to time, as do other campaigns and folks who are just saying, like, hey, what do you think of this? Or when you worked on this particular issue, do you have any thoughts? And I'm always happy to do that. But no, I don't think, like right now I'm very happy with my acting career, and nobody has called, so I can't answer that question.
Not just, you were talking about privacy here, so I'm not really kind of going to nudge this too far, but we want to congratulate you for your engagement.
Oh, thank you.
So.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
In my head, I think you're going to go home and like watch NASCAR and a beer or something. Where are you with your love for, or I want to call it love, but where are you with your relationship with NASCAR?
So I don't want to ruin the end of the NASCAR chapter. There's a chapter in the book about how my partner Josh and I met. We met in DC. Our basically one of our first dates. He didn't know him very well. He comes over with an 18-pack of Coors Light. And I had SpongeBob SquarePants on the TV because I'm a romantic and a man-child. And he changes the channel to a NASCAR race. And I was like, oh, this is unironic? Like, so this dude is obviously leaving with 16 of those beers in like 15 minutes because this is not going to work out. So the end of that story was how we bonded off of NASCAR mostly because of the aspect of camping. So I knew nothing about NASCAR, but I did know a lot about camping so Josh was from rural Mississippi. And NASCAR races were big family events because it was a relatively low-cost way to spend time with your family because you could camp at these races. So it was a chance to spend time with your loved ones. In our case, my parents didn't have a lot of money either, even though we were in a suburb of New York City. So camping was a way that you would spend time with other families, and you'd go to campgrounds in other parts of the Northeast. So that was really what we bonded on. But the byproduct of that was I do kind of love NASCAR still. The physics that goes into if you don't,
it's science, right?
There's a lot of science that goes into it. Also, if you have the chance to go to a race, like, it doesn't feel like there are any laws. Like, you can drink beer and sit on the roof of your car and watch these fast cars go by while you're getting wasted. It's really fun, actually.
I know we've got questions from the audience here, but before we take questions from the audience, I can't let you go if I don't ask you this question.
Yeah.
Is Harold and Kumar going into the multiverse?
All right. So wait, but multiverse means other people play us too, right?
Or you could be playing all your different versions of you and John Cho. There could be a Star Trek version of him, and there could be a White House version of Kumar.
I would not be opposed to that. We've talked a lot about wanting to do a fourth film. I feel like we're all on board. John Hurwitz and Hayden Schlossberg, the two incredibly talented guys who created the franchise, they've written all three movies. They're on Cobra Kai. They created Cobra Kai for Netflix. So they've been really busy the last few years. So it's really a question of like, is there an idea, right? Is there this does not mean everybody slips into the DMs with like, especially when they've had drinks or smoke. I have the best idea, man. Harold and Kumar should come to my town, and it would be like the best, funniest story. That's my pitch for you. I'm like, thank you. I'm not trying to disparage that. What I mean is there's so much love for that franchise. We want to find the right angle to it, and I would love to do another one. The multiverse sounds good to me.
I know. All right, let's take some questions. I believe there's a microphone for everyone to use. I see one over here, David. All right. Hello, sir.
Yeah. Thank you for a very engrossing interview. I have two questions. Was the title of your book inspired by the tennis player John McEnroe's confrontation with an umpire? And number two, What do you think of this general misconception, at least in DC and in America, about the group Asian Americans referring to East Asians and Southeast Asians and not Indians, Pakistanis, Sri Lankans?
Sure. I'll answer the second one first. I feel like it does include all of those communities, and it's a massive umbrella. One of the reasons that it includes all those communities is because of the immigration laws that changed in the mid-'60s. So it had to do with the combination of the Asian Exclusion Act being lifted and tweaked, and then all of the labor shortages and where people were allowed to come from in Asia. So that's number one. But number two, it's a massive, like when I worked on Asian American outreach, we would almost like, it's ridiculous that there's this massive umbrella group for people with completely different immigration experiences, language access experiences, demographics, income. So the fact that especially government still does this to some extent, but there's no disaggregation in data collection. I don't want to get too nerdy right now, but when you're only asking people if they're Asian American or any other category, you're putting the Bengali cab driver and the Hmong farmer and the wealthy Indian doctor in the same category, and that results in a lot of federal resources being wasted because they have different needs in their community, different needs to learn English, language access, health, and so there was a big push, and remains still a big push, to disaggregate that data, which is not to say that they're not Asian American, but to find out what these communities' needs actually are. And then the second question about the book, I had no idea that McEnroe's book was called You Cannot Be Serious. But boy, did I find out on Twitter when we released this cover. What's wrong with you? I hate you so much. You're no tennis player. No, I'm not a tennis player at all. Gosh, thank you. But no, so I had no idea. But yeah, his is cannot, mine is can't.
I think there's one right here in the middle.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi.
So reading your book, I just want to say, as also a child of an immigrant parent and also an alumni of forensics, woo.
All right.
I related to a lot of things that you were saying in your book. And particularly, you had a scene where in high school, you met with a guidance counselor and was trying to figure out, what am I going to do with my life?
Yeah.
You also had another incident with another teacher who flipped a coin and told you, okay, you're going to drama school or you're going to do political science.
Yeah.
I had that exact same scenario, like to a T, conversation with a teacher. And so I'm just curious that if you could go back in time and put yourself in the position of that guidance counselor, what would you tell your high school self?
I've thought about this a lot. So this guidance counselor basically said, I had said that I wanted to either go to theater or film school and then also work in public service on the side somehow, because that was an interest of mine. And she kept saying, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You have to pick one. And I think in retrospect, what she probably meant was, and this also goes for like my parents' friends who would say crazy things when I said I wanted to be an artist. I think what they meant was this is an almost impossibly difficult closed industry to access. And so if you want to access it, your life is going to be a lot more challenging in the short term, or maybe even the long term, than some of your peers. And that turned out to be true, right? Most of I had the privilege of going to college, obviously, but a lot of my friends who I was in school with were not theater or film majors. So I remember we were all sharing this house right after graduation, and like three of the guys, one bought a new TV, one had a new car, like a new little Toyota or something, from their signing bonuses at their consulting firms. And I'm like literally eating ramen and trying to work odd jobs to get gas money. So I think if that was outlined for me a little bit more, I would have probably understood it a bit. I don't think it would have changed the decision, because I think a lot of these professions are also a little bit self-weeding, right? Like if your guidance counselor or your parents deter you from entering that field, I mean, that's the easy thing. Like those conversations are way easier than dealing with a producer or dealing with a casting director. So I think in a lot of sense, those are also weeders, and maybe that's how they designed it, and maybe that would have been a good thing. Like if it's not something I actually wanted to pursue, hearing that might have been like, yeah, okay, maybe I shouldn't pursue this.
I think we have time for 2 more questions.
Sorry, I'll talk fast. I know
That's
I'm
all right.
long-winded.
She's right there in the middle.
Hi. So first of all, I want to thank you for all of the drunken friends that I had to take to White Castle during law school. But you talked a lot about sort of talking to people on the other side of the aisle and making those connections. We are very divided, as you know. And I am very, and I'm sure a lot of us are very sort of concerned about how we bridge those gaps. What are some of the things that you saw in your conversations with people who politically disagreed with you that you think may be good for us to take a step back and sort of evaluate and maybe implement?
It's a great question, an increasingly more difficult one, I think, as things get more and more polarized. There's a couple of things. I mean, on the one hand, I feel like there's an opportunity with people you actually know. It's very hard to yell and scream. First of all, sending a nasty tweet on Twitter feels fantastic. I'm not going to say it doesn't. I just don't think it necessarily moves the needle on anything. And so this misconception that tweeting about something is your activism for the day is awful, like that, because it just doesn't do anything and it only perpetuates a problem. It's also like having beers with people you disagree with is a much better way to actually have a conversation about something. Don't go over like beer 5, because then you will fight, but like less than 5 beers is all good. And I also think then finding the commonality within something and recognizing that we may philosophically hate the idea that compromise is necessary, but it is, you're in a democracy where that's necessary. And the reality is, like, I hope that we add seats to the Supreme Court. I hope that we force a change to filibuster rules, no matter what the consequences down the line. That's my feeling right now. I wish we would push harder, but the reality may be a little bit different. And so things like when I was the youth liaison, I tell the story in the book, but I feel like it's worth mentioning for your question. So one of my tasks one month was putting together a climate summit at the White House, and we had, I think, about 120 seats. And so first thought was like, great, 120 progressives who should come into the room. I'm like, no, because our goal is climate change legislation. And so, and while because of the Hatch Act, we couldn't directly tell people to lobby Congress, but what we did instead was, so about a third of the young people we invited were young progressives, a third were young evangelical Christian conservatives, hate Obama on 95% of things. They don't even necessarily believe in science, but they do believe that we should take care of God's green earth. And so any legislation that can be passed to achieve that goal, and it may not look identical to what young progressives want, but I want you at the table for that conversation. And then the remaining third were people who probably didn't care very much about climate one way or the other. They were young entrepreneurs who just wanted to sell gadgets from their new startup companies. So like charging your phone from the kinetic energy you create when you walk down the street, stuff like that. So we put these 3 groups of people in this room, and it was an opportunity for convening space, but B, the realization that we wish people would do that a lot more. I know I promised I wouldn't be long-winded, but during this summit, there were 2 wonderful women. One was an exec director, one was a deputy director from a climate organization. They were both invited to the meeting, Progressive Climate Organization. I looked out my window as people were coming into the meeting, and I noticed there were 50 incredible, talented young people standing outside the White House in T-shirts from this organization with picket signs saying things like, Obama doesn't care about climate, shame on you, Obama, things like that. This is 2010, by the way. So like we hadn't even had legislation that had the chance to fail. So climate legislation, come on, I'm not, but we didn't get climate legislation done. So I pulled them aside and I said, like, look, as a White House official, I certainly can't tell you what to do. I'm super curious why you brought 50 energetic young people to this meeting. And they, with no sense of irony, said, we just want to make sure our voice is being heard. And I was like, when you get invited to the White House, your voice is being heard. You're like in the meeting, you're in the room. And they said, yeah, well, we just wanted to make sure. Now, the thing that I couldn't say because of the Hatch Act, which apparently is meaningless given the former administration, but we abided by it. And so I couldn't say, here's a list of 10 Senate and House targets. go protest in front of their offices, or better yet, put on a suit and meet with them if we feel like they're on the fence. If they're not on the fence, yeah, shake the shit up and get the media attention to help drive whatever that is. But we couldn't say that, right? And so I felt like this was wasted energy. That energy might have been, I mean, if you're going to pick it because you want the president to do something on executive action after the legislative opportunity has failed, fine. But this wasn't that conversation. So I felt disappointed that A, I wasn't able to offer those tools, and B, they had made the choice to do the easier thing, which is to target one person instead of targeting 100, right? And so I think those types of things, we did have great conversations that came out of that. There was no change to any legislative proposals. But I think if we did a little bit more of that and finding that 5% of overlap, and drowning out the noise that might feel wonderful to tweet about, but it's not the real work that has to be done. There's a lot that we can still get done. If you look at the Kansas referendum on abortion, that's a great example of what happens when you actually organize and turn off MSNBC. You know.
David, can we do one more question? Let's do one quick one.
Okay. Thank you so much for your work, in public service and with the Obama administration.
Thank you.
You talk a lot about working with the youth, but also how can we, especially in the or the Asian American community, and especially in such an important election year, get our elders to go out and vote and get engaged?
Take them a voter sign-up form, if you can't do it online, help them fill it out, and then take a bunch of them to vote. Or set up the mail by vote, depending on where they are, vote by mail, and literally helping them do it. I mean, this was one of the, neither Obama nor Trump would have won if they hadn't expanded the electorate effectively in certain states. So I only know this obviously on the Obama side, but registering new voters and making sure that they showed up to the polls, both in the primary and the general, was a game changer. So, and if you looked at the Georgia Senate race last time, which also then was the, like the climate thing last week would not have happened without Georgia. Georgia likely wouldn't have happened without high Asian American turnout. And that was because literally that grassroots level of being able to get people registered and make sure that you got buses for them or you babysat their kids while they went to go vote or you took them to the polls, all that stuff actually matters a lot more than I think we think of when we turn on the TV.
So Cal, before we wrap up, one of the things that you mentioned in the book is one of your dreams is to go to a gift shop and find your name on a keychain or a mug or a license
real name,
plate.
Kalpen Modi, not Kalpen,
Well, if you find it, let me know, 'cause I can't find it either.
I know,
so,
right?
Unless I go to Roswell, New Mexico. But let's give a round of applause to Kalpen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can we also just get a big round of applause for everyone who hosted, and thank you for moderating. And also just like, it's super nice to be able to do this at a public library that, and in partnership with an independent local bookstore. So, and thank you everybody for coming out, and hopefully see you out there to sign some books.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right.
Yes, thanks everybody. Thank you, Cal. Thank you, Roswell. Books are still for sale upstairs from East City Bookshop. And give us some time. We'll head up there for some signing. We're going to keep the line snappy. But thanks everybody for coming. We really appreciate it.